if BlackRock is really where we should be paying attention, if Larry Fink is who they're both basically going to go to, or Larry Fink affiliated entities or people, what is BlackRock's agenda? What do they want?
Yeah, so I think there's things that we can look at as far as BlackRock is concerned that sort of give us clues as to what their agenda may be. And the most concerning thing to me about that, as it relates to people like Larry Fink, is that Larry Fink is on record saying things like markets don't really like democracies because they're messy. Markets like totalitarian governments. It's pretty clear that whoever is the next president is going to have to deal with some sort of US government debt crisis. And I'm concerned about how that response is going to be, regardless of which candidate wins. So, for example, Trump, in his case, when there was a major economic crisis in the form of, what happened economically as a result of lockdown policy and because of COVID-19, the person that he and his administration reached out to was Larry Fink of BlackRock, who implemented something we can get into later that some researchers have called the going direct reset, which was basically a way to put money from QE directly in the hands of the private sector instead of public entities, sort of like it had been done before. And arguably that resulted in a massive wealth transfer, and BlackRock didn't really use that money to help Main Street at all. They used it to buy shares in their own ETFs, among other things. And then Kamala, in her case, her entire economic team is essentially led by former BlackRock executives. And that was also true for the Biden administration. So essentially BlackRock, which was also played a major role in sort of developing the bailouts in the 2008 economic crisis, which was under Obama, right? Will likely be developing the response for whatever this, coming economic crisis is, regardless of who gets in office. If we look at, the policy actions of the people running who they turn to in a time of crisis, or who is running their economic team, that seems increasingly likely. So that is why I'm very concerned, I guess I would say, about BlackRock in particular, because they seem to be the people that the government turns to, regardless of whether a Democrat or a Republican is in office. And, they have sort of a history of really affecting wealth transfers during these crises at a time when, they're supposedly developing or helping develop policy meant to bail out Main Street. They end up sort of affecting massive bailouts for Wall Streets. And of course, the people that BlackRock are trying to generate profits for ultimately. And the other thing that I'm really concerned about as it relates to, a coming economic crisis is that I think we're going to see a major effort to saddle American consumers with programmable, surveillable money and seizable money. And so, of course, a lot of people for years now have been very concerned about central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. But there are also things issued by the private sector, like stable coins, for example, that are just as programmable and surveillable and seizable as CBDCs are. So I think it's very likely, in the event of a major debt crisis or some sort of crisis that damages significantly regular Americans' purchasing power, there will be an effort to onboard Americans onto one of those two versions of programmable, surveillable money. So it's possible, if Kamala wins, we could see a CBDC or something like that. But in the case of Trump, he's sort of come out in favor of stable coins. He did that recently at his speech at the Bitcoin conference earlier this year. And, stable coins are just as programmable and surveillable and seizable as CBDCs in theory are. And I think those, as people have rightly pointed out, are a threat to our financial privacy and ultimately our financial freedom. So I think people should be focusing not just on CBDCs, but also, these other digital currencies that have the potential to offer those same, Orwellian functionalities to the people, issuing them and producing them. And some of those prominent stablecoins, like Circle, for example, have major alliances with BlackRock, and BlackRock has a minority stake in them, and have, said in their some of their SEC filings that, the stablecoins can be used to manipulate the price of Bitcoin, for example.
All right, we've already here in the opening minutes we put a lot of things on the table. I want to start now piecing them together into a worldview that somebody that doesn't have your depth of knowledge, where they can begin to understand how this all pieces together. So, me as somebody on the outside of this, I look at it. I'm way more worried about um, whether Republicans or Democrats get into office based entirely on what their economic policy is. You're really the first person that's been clear in saying, no, 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 you're looking at the wrong level of analysis. You need to understand that they're both going to the same people to come up with their policies. So whatever promises you hear, that's ultimately not going to matter. So what I want to understand is, if BlackRock is really where we should be paying attention, if Larry Fink is who they're both basically going to go to, or Larry Fink affiliated entities or people, what is BlackRock's agenda? What do they want?
Yeah, so I think there's things that we can look at as far as BlackRock is concerned that sort of give us clues as to what their agenda may be. And the most concerning thing to me about that, as it relates to people like Larry Fink, is that Larry Fink is on record saying things like markets don't really like democracies because they're messy. Markets like totalitarian governments. And Larry Fink is someone who's been very obsessed with risk management most of his career, and sees essentially free democracies, and arguably also a free market in some senses, as as generating more risk than perhaps he would like to handle. So when you're able to sort of control and centralize both markets and governments, you're able to control the amount of risk that's there. And so maybe that's good for asset managers like Larry Fink, who are obsessed with this kind of stuff. But for regular people, ultimately it reduces the amount of freedom that we would have. So I sort of see Larry Fink as someone who's looking to centralize power and centralize wealth, and obviously that has major impacts on regular Americans and the people that aren't necessarily in the oligarch class or in the top 1% that would benefit from those types of policies.
Whoa. Okay. That is extremely direct. Okay. So you have somebody who understands this is about risk mitigation, that a Democratic government is going to have a lot more volatility. I mean, even as I think about America having this moral standing in the world, sort of being the world's cop, but every 4 years, we have this sort of violent whiplash from one policy direction to the other. I've often thought about how jarring that must be to other world leaders. And so, for better or worse, I can actually see what you mean. If somebody is investing in the marketplace and they want to make sure that they have a predictable level of risk so that they can not completely control the outcomes, but that they can narrow the band of outcomes so that they don't have this gigantic
Mhm.
potential downside. And the way that we get that is totalitarian top-down control. Okay. That's a very clear thesis. Now the question becomes, how are they going about doing it? What are the mechanisms?
Well, I think this is something that's much larger than just BlackRock specifically, but in terms of looking at what BlackRock has done in terms of like U.S. fiscal policy, I think it's important to sort of look at their role in the '08 crisis, which began the policy of quantitative easing, and later on they were called upon by the Trump administration to help develop COVID fiscal response. But actually, it began before then. So in the fall of 2019 at Jackson Hole, this is also, should point out, this is based on the very excellent research of John Titus of the YouTube channel Best Evidence. Essentially, this document was presented by BlackRock to central bankers at Jackson Hole. It was called Going Direct, is what they called it. And basically, the idea was to have what was generated via quantitative easing not just go to like public of sector affiliated entities, but also directly into the hands of the private sector.